Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to bridge silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we are going to be discussing the Bullied Brain with our special guest, Vicki Courtemanche and Jen Fraser. So thank you both for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Sean, for having us, and Amanda. My name is Vicki Courtemanche, and I am the co-founder of End Workplace Abuse and the co-author of the Workplace Psychological Safety Act.
And I'm Jen Fraser. I've been working on bullying and abuse and what it does to the brain and to the psyche and the body for the last 10 years. My latest book came out last year. It's called The Bullied Brain. And as we'll get to today in the show, the subtitle is Heal Your Scars and Restore Your Health. So just to fill everyone with hope, no matter what's happened to you, your brain is innately wired to heal and repair.
And that is really something that we want to hear when we come out of work like that too. We have no hope. I left my job on March 15th, 2018. I didn't know what hit me. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't realize, I knew I was being bullied by an individual, but I didn't realize that the employer was also complicit in the abuse. And so for 15 months, I had been, psychologically abused, bullied by both the individual and by some of my employer's representative employees.
Well, we are both very excited to have you both with us today because while we've often talked about trauma and those kind of impacts in a general sense, or like how it kind of just impacts somebody on that interaction, on their levels of like interacting with others, really kind of diving into that neurological impacts or how that can really impact someone's whole life and not just like their inability to trust others or things like that is going to be a really fun conversation. But Vicki, as you alluded to, because of what you experienced, you're kind of the person that a lot of what Jen's work on is about. So as you've alluded to, Vicki, do you want to just share a little bit of that story then for our audience?
Sure. So as I said, I didn't even know what happened, because this abuse is internal. So I had incurred a brain injury, but I didn't know it. And so all I knew was I had to come out, and there are only three outcomes with workplace bullying, which is really one of the largest growing issues of violence in the world today in the workplace. I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Let me just go at that again.
Maybe I can just jump in there, Vicki,
Okay.
for 1 second. I think it's really powerful that you use the word violence, because what I found in my work, and this will start to make more sense as you unpack what they did to you, why it impacted you, and how you ended up with brain injury. What I have learned is that we live in a society that does not factor the brain in at all. Like when you look at the laws even, and you look at workplace abuse and psychological safety, we're still using outdated terms like psychological safety. That's old fashioned, that's outdated. They should be using the term for accuracy, brain safety. Now, if you need to wear a helmet to protect your skull from an injury, you also need to know that when you go to work, people cannot injure your brain. They don't need to touch you. Their violence can be through language. It can be through ignoring you. It can be from not inviting you to things and ostracizing you. It can be from a smear campaign or rumors. It can be from sexual harassment. It does not need to touch your body. And they can see on brain scans the damage that is done to your brain. It's visible and it's physical. It's architectural damage to the brain. So this is really the big breakthrough. And this is the exciting place we're at right now, where as you've been working so hard, Vicki, we're about to see change.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I came out, what I was dying to say, when I came out that day, I knew I was bullied by an individual, but I didn't know the institutional complicity part of it. And it was only one day after I left the workplace that I Googled workplace bullying. And even 5 years ago, that term it wasn't really even out there. And that's when I realized that it was more than the bully, and that these other, that other people who I trusted, I believed them when they told me that there was a complaint process. They told me that there would be an investigation. They just baited me over and over and over to keep me in that toxic work environment. And, so my health declined in sync with the abuse. So I just deteriorated. And then, that last week of work before I came out was just unbelievable. I had got to the point where I was only sleeping maybe 1 or 2 hours a day. I could not get myself, to stop ruminating, because that's what they do. They tell you all these lies, and I believe them because they were sitting in an administrative office building on a college campus cashing 6-figure paychecks, and what I say is, if they were behind bars, maybe I would have been better able to discern, but I was not able to. I was conned. The ultimate con. Like I said, the bully was right in my face, but it was more the betrayal of others, that really just pushed me over the edge. And I remember going numb from head to toe. Jennifer, maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, there's 2 things that you've said that make me just think that there might be some useful information here. I think that what you're describing as the betrayal trauma or the institutional complicity, of course, domestic abuse survivors deal with this kind of thing all the time too. And what I think is really important to understand is, and I'm going to quote Michael Merzenich. Dr. Michael Merzenich is one of the world's leading neuroscientists. He's one of the most highly awarded neuroscientists alive today. He's an American in California. And he wrote the foreword to my book, and he dialogued with me about the bullied brain throughout the book. So I just put quotes around his brilliance and his genius, and I just put it right into the bullied brain, because to listen to him is honestly a privilege. He's just incredible. Anyhow, what he said to me made so much sense. And he has this really good ability to take neuroscientific knowledge and share it with a layperson like myself, an educator and a writer. And he said, the brain is designed to make sense of the world. So the lungs are to breathe air in and out. The heart is to pump our blood through our bodies. The brain's job is to make sense of an incredible amount of data that 24/7 is coming into the brain from the body and into the brain from the environment and from social interaction. Just imagine the amount of data. Your brain is 24/7 going, okay, this means this. This is the story I'm going to attach to that. These are the past experiences I've had that I'm going to use to code this experience and make a decision on how to act, blah, blah, blah. Think creativity, problem solving, all that. What happened to you was, and this is what Michael said, when the brain can't answer the question, all systems degrade. They can see it on brain scans. They can see it in the results of how the person behaves. It's like they've received a traumatic blow to the head, like a concussion. They don't have balance. They feel numb. They can't speak. They can't remember. You ask them their name and they can't tell you what their name is, because all systems have literally degraded, because the brain has gone into a panic mode. If it can't answer the question, it can't make sense of reality. It's like stopping the heart or blocking the lungs. So this is one way we can talk about what happened to you. There's another way that we can talk about that sensation of going numb that's different from Michael's work. It's another neuroscientist's work, but it's described as an evolutionary trait. So our brains and bodies developed through evolution to be very, very similar. We think we're so distinct and so superior, but we're actually not. We're deeply aligned with other creatures on the planet. So the first response that we have, our most ancient response, probably from about 500 million years ago, is what reptiles still do today, or other sort of creatures like that. They go numb. They play dead. That is the only way they know how to survive. And when we hit that type of crisis in our brains and bodies, sometimes it's described as freeze. If you see somebody who becomes paralyzed, they cannot move. They sink into depression. They get under the covers. They just stop being able to cope. at all. That would be a dorsal vagal response that's natural to survival. So the things that we do, like a domestic abuse survivor, a workplace abuse survivor, we're doing all of these sort of biological, neurobiological responses that nobody teaches us about. So we think there's something wrong with us. We think we have a mental health crisis. We think all these things. Actually, your brain and body have decided that you're in really serious danger. And they're going to help you survive by making you so still that the predator walks away. And they're going to give you a chance to restore and rejuvenate under the covers, eating lots of ice cream, maybe, just to get your glucose levels up and get back on track. And it looks bad maybe from the outside, but if you know your brain and body and what it's doing, you're like, thank you, I needed that. So there's a bunch more to that, but let's stop there to keep hearing more of the story.
Yeah. And Vicki, very quickly before you continue on, I just want to point out for our listeners, because it might be a little bit powerful for them to be able to make that connection, is that some of the things that you were saying, like being betrayed by the people who you had told what happened to you, having the inability to sleep or stay asleep, having those very, very much trauma responses to what you were experiencing, even though what you were experiencing wasn't domestic violence, it is the responses that your body was having were very much similar to what many victims of domestic violence will say they experienced after that trauma, or even in response to when they disclosed that trauma to somebody else, the responses that they had made them feel betrayed, and almost it hurt them more than the actual incident itself. And those were the things that you're saying. So helping people recognize that when we're experiencing a trauma, often our bodies are still going to have very similar reactions to it, and the failure of those around us to assist or listen in that moment is going to feel similar. It might not be the same, but the feelings are similar there.
Mm-hmm. That it's true, and that was the most difficult thing for me, was trying to communicate to anyone what I was feeling and what I was. I didn't know myself, and my husband was my rock. He let me say all the words I had to say, and I didn't know what I was feeling. I didn't know. He just was like trying to take care of me. And I did, like, Jennifer said, I did, shut down for the next couple of days. I barely spoke after, learning that information. And then I was just trying to process, what am I going to do with this? And within weeks, I made the decision not to talk about it at all, except with my therapist and with my husband, because every time I did, I was re-traumatized, and I didn't know what that was. So here I am trying to get myself better. And if I try to talk about it, I would lose it. And I self-isolated. I really stayed in the house for the next month. I really didn't do anything. So just, for the next month, I just had to think about, what am I going to do? And you don't realize that this is just, it's not that I have physical ailment, because, of everything that's gone on. I had insomnia, anxiety, all those things I was coerced into in that environment. So I had health harm, I had mental harm, I had emotional harm, and I had financial harm. Okay, my husband had retired. We were on my health insurance. I was not in a position to retire. I had a mortgage, so they devastated me, and that is just the plan. That's the plan. They wanted me to just go away, and for a long time, I did.
Well, another interesting thing in there too is that how, when we discuss abuse, or try to give those red flags or warning signs of an unhealthy or abusive relationship, specifically focusing on that dating aspect, abusive people, regardless of whether or not it's a dating abuse situation or an abusive employer, an abusive friend, an abusive family member, they use very similar tactics. So hearing you say well, we needed my health insurance, or I relied on them because I needed that paycheck or they needed that money, so there wasn't much for me to be able to do because I needed those things. An abusive partner is going to do the same thing. They need their victim to be reliant on them, to make that victim feel trapped or stuck. And that's exactly what your employer was doing in that situation. They needed you to feel stuck or trapped, because that way, even if you speak out about it, well, what are you going to do? Like, you need us.
That was the toughest part, was having no place to speak. And, this phenomenon, workplace bullying and mobbing, is dubbed a silent epidemic, because it's like I said, they didn't, I lost everything. They leveled my life, because the one thing they don't want is for you to come back and point an accusatory finger. And it has taken me years, but I'm pointing my finger and I'm not being quiet. I will never be quiet. I will probably never go back to the workplace because of, my age and but I have children in the workplace. I have grandchildren that are going to the workplace, and I will not be quiet.
I wanted to make a distinction, Sean, when you jumped in and you were making an analogy. It's funny because I felt the impulse to make a distinction where in the workplace, the whole system is designed to treat the victim as if they are the problem, and they protect the perpetrator, which is a completely shocking thing to your brain, because you've been told all your life that bullying is unacceptable. It won't be tolerated, zero tolerance. Safety is the priority. Respect is the priority. They tell you all these very high level, this is who we are and this is what we do. And really it's children that have a problem with bullying, not adults. Adults don't do it. Well, that's, I mean, as Vicki says perfectly, those are all lies. Those are all lies they are myths that we maintain to function, I guess, to continue this normalized, I call it the bullying and abuse paradigm, or bullying and abuse framework. And it's normalized in our society, our workplace, our homes, our domestic life, our romance, our churches, our sports, our arts. They are rife with abuse. And either we admit that and we take a hard look at it, like what you guys are doing on your podcast, having the courage to talk about things that are really challenging and really can be very painful for people. If we can't find the courage to do that, if we can't find the courage to speak up like Vicki does, we're just perpetuating this really broken system. So what I wanted to say, though, that's different in domestic abuse is that in domestic abuse, in a sense, I would argue one of the ways of looking at it is you have two highly traumatized people who've come together. And one traumatized person, the perpetrator of the coercion or the control or the violence or the financial oppression or whatever it is, their deepest fear is that they will be abandoned. And they will do anything to stop abandonment. And that's where the control piece comes from. They don't feel that the person will stay with them based on their own intrinsic value. They don't have value. They think that they have to control the other person, make them dependent. Once that person is dependent, they continue to live in this kind of paranoid state that the person will leave them. So in institutional complicity, you get the opposite, where they can't wait, as Vicki put it, to get rid of you. The last thing they want is anyone who's vocal. They will crush you in order to maintain status quo. And oftentimes, and all of this sounds very moral and nefarious and so on, what's really interesting from a brain point of view is that a lot of it is just everybody trying to survive. So what happens in institutional complicity, even though it hurts when you get maltreated the way Vicki was, what's really happening is chances are very good the perpetrator has groomed the higher ups. They've already developed relationships that are close and connected and caring and well established with HR, with leadership, with managers. And so when someone like Vicki says, hey, so-and-so is abusive, their brains can't understand it. Their brains go, no, that's not possible, because I've never seen so-and-so be abusive. And they're actually a good friend of mine. And we have dinner with her and her husband every couple of weeks. And we play bridge, and there's just no way. Vicki must be crazy. Vicki's the problem. We can't have people like that defaming and accusing our good people at work. Got to get rid of her. So you can see like the brains malfunction all over the place in these types of things.
That makes me think of when you were comparing like the domestic violence relationship. It's more like that with the bully, with the perpetrator herself. She was, this is research that's backed by, for 4 decades now, but she felt insecure. She was threatened by my competency. I had no idea that I was a threat to her. But what she did was she, asked me to work from a remote location. She kept me, she would, unless I absolutely had to go to work to another location, she wanted me to stay in the same building where she was. She, did everything that she could to control me, and I, you know, kind of went, I didn't realize it. So I'm just like, okay, she's the director, I'm the assistant director. So I kind of just, gave her what she wanted. And when a point came when our relationships became more lateral, our titles weren't changed, but our positions were, and I was moved into another building, boom, that's when she went after me. And she did not let up. And the thing with the institutional complicity piece is that employers are technically not liable for psychological abuse or behavior, and they don't want to be. So here I go and I report the bully. And so what I'm really doing is reporting psychological abuse. And so then what they see is me as the threat of liability. And that's why they come after me. So, and then the bully stays in there. So her abusive behavior is still in the workplace, and it deteriorates your whole work environment. There's a lot of researchers who have done, the business, they call it the business, I forget, the business plan or whatever, the business argument, because it's not good for your business when you have people like this running around, it threatens people start shutting down. They're not creative. They're not sharing ideas. You're afraid your head's going to be the next one on the block. So
what you're describing beautifully, Vicki, is the middle stage of how we evolved, the brain and body. We can either go into numbness or complete retreat, or kind of acting like plain dead, if you want to think about animals, or we can go into what happens in businesses where everybody's in a fight or flight mode. So flight mode, you're losing talent. You don't have good retention. All kinds of people want to be transferred. They want to get away from. You see this all the time with abusive coaches. All kinds of talented players will be like, I want to go to another program, even though they did everything to get into the one program that they're in. These are always red flags of abusive cultures. And another thing that you said is really important, and that is that, again, a myth that we operate under is that the bully will attack you for your vulnerability. And yes, they might, but really what they do is they go after those that threaten them, because they are so insecure. And just like the domestic abuser, the perpetrator is so insecure that they manifest in this fight mode. So they manifest a lot of aggressive behaviors. So if you think of a dog, for example, if you get a dog that's a rescue dog that's been regularly harmed, they've been denied food, they've been denied water, they've been left in heat that made them suffer, they've been beaten, they will manifest a lot of aggressive behaviors. If you approach them, they'll start to growl, they'll flatten their ears and tail, their fur will stand up on end. So think bully, think domestic abuser. This person is harnessing violence in order to say they're in danger, and they know it, and their past is present, and they are wired to survive. So Vicki, you went into the wiring to survive just retreat. This person's in sympathetic fight or flight mode, and that's the middle developing. We're very much like mammals that way. We fight or flight. You see it in the animal world, and that's a really good way to remember what it's like when you see a human behaving that way. You're actually witnessing a creature who's feeling very, very at risk, and in domestic abuse. And I'm not trying to pardon this behavior any way, shape, or form. I'm not trying to say people aren't completely, as adults, accountable for the harm that they do to other people or to themselves. But I also think that if we sidestep the moral, which is there and it has to be dealt with, and we look at the medical, what's going on in the brain and body, it just gives us fuller understanding so that we could potentially not have so much of these types of behaviors in the home, in romance, in the workplace, etc.
Yeah.
I think that it's so interesting how you can take this, like the fight or flight or freeze responses, because I feel like most people understand that when it comes to physical danger, right? Like that's something that we've all kind of been around, we've heard about, maybe we've even experienced it ourselves. There's a physical harm, and what do we do for it? But to know that our brain does the same thing for that psychological harm, for that that violence that's happening that isn't physical, to know that our brains can do the same thing where they are going to make us freeze, or they're going to make us, fight with that aggression or whatever. Like, I know so many people who have anxiety problems, and they talk about how, like, their hands will go numb, or their feet will go, like, parts of them will go numb. And I never thought that was literally like a brain response to the trauma that they're feeling. And I just think that's so interesting to know, and it makes so much sense.
Yeah, a really interesting research piece is, and it's an interesting way to identify people. When you have somebody who's being very traumatized and they are trying to connect with you, oftentimes or trying to oppress you, depends, they will really struggle to look into your eyes. They will not, like a regular person, and animals do this too. Animals know that meeting of the eyes is a very clear sign of, don't mess with me. I'm solid. I see you and you see me. And if I have to, I'll do what I need to do to survive. That's a very clear message in the animal world. That's why you were probably not wise to meet the eyes of an animal that's very traumatized, whether, it's a dog or a horse, because you're provoking their trauma. You're poking the bear in a sense. So when you meet with other human beings and they can't hold your eyes, then you know that in a sense, even though this might feel like, like slippery or something, it's actually a bit of a cowering mechanism. It's a fear response. And so even if they are much more powerful than you and they can hurt you, they might still, their own trauma that they're wired by from their past, probably childhood, is causing them to not provoke because they're afraid. And it's a really interesting thing to watch for. And again, like, what's so amazing about the brain is, as we said, the brain is wired to heal. It's wired to repair and recover. And the brain is profoundly social. So I just want to make one key point here. The third phase of brain development is called the ventral vagal. It doesn't matter what it's called, but the third phase is co-regulation. And what we know about the brain is we are the most social creatures on the planet. This is why COVID was so hard on people, because they didn't know just how social their brain was and how much it needs interaction. So, we've got Maslow's hierarchy that everybody knows. It's like, oh, you can't have higher level things like connection till you have shelter and food. That's not true for the brain. The brain inverts that triangle. For the brain, you have to have shelter and food to survive, and connection. If you just have shelter and food, you don't survive. Your brain doesn't develop properly. You become completely handicapped and stunted as a human being. And most people don't know that. So one of the key things, and we all know is domestic abuse. One of the first techniques of the person to maintain control and ensure that the person can never abandon them is to isolate them. So Vicki, what you're describing is so similar to a domestic abuse case. She tried to isolate you in order to ensure that she could always have you under her thumb because you were such a threat to her.
And then when I came out of the workplace, I self-isolated again because I just didn't know really what else to do. So within weeks, I don't know why, I guess maybe just because I'm older and I'm a fighter, but I don't know why I made this crazy decision about a week out of the, maybe 2 weeks out of the workplace. And I had been reading about, what was out there about bullying. And so I understood physically that my brain was flooded with cortisol. And so, what I needed more than anything was sleep, which I couldn't do, and exercise, which you can't do when you don't sleep. So I was between a rock and a hard place. And I did start taking some anti-anxiety medication, which I did not want to take while I was at work, but I ended up taking it and trying to get myself to sleep. And then I got up every day and I don't know how I did it. Honestly, I think about it and I don't know how I did it, but I got on that treadmill for like 30 minutes, at a good pace, 5 days out of the 7. That was my goal for myself. And I just wanted to do it for 12 weeks because that's when I knew I would be severed from work. So that was like my goal. I just wanted to get to that point. And I did it. And I'm sure I did, benefit. I know it helped me get better. But the long story longer is that I did not get better. I was not able to sleep through the night or stay down through the night for over 2 years. I started exercising. I still exercise on and on, but I was so, even at that 12-week mark, I was again re-traumatized, with the severance, like they're sending you things, congratulations on your retirement. I'm going, I mean, but it's like I said, I was trying to fight. I felt like I was trying, and I didn't know, again, I'm trying to say, my poor husband was like my seeing eye dog. I was afraid, I've got on a plane. I've flown to Australia. I'm not afraid of, but after that, I would not go anyplace unless he went with me for the next, at least several months. And then, like I said, it took me 2 years before I whispered even to myself, I think I feel like myself again.
That's a very beautiful ending to such an awful story. One of the things that I think is really important that you're saying, I mean, it's funny to me because it's like I'm listening to you describe the chapters of the Bullied Brain, because there is a chapter on the research into physical exercise and why it's so incredibly important for your brain. It lowers cortisol. It pumps up BDNF, it stands for brain-derived neurotropic factor. Again, doesn't matter what it stands for. All you need to know is it's like fertilizer for the brain. And it helps neurogenesis. So it helps the birth of new brain cells. It helps neuroplasticity. That's your brain's ability to change and get better. So, 12 weeks isn't going to be enough. Really, a lifetime of aerobic fitness is one of the greatest things you can do for health and strength in your brain and body. Incredible benefits to the brain. But it makes your brain more resilient, and it also helps your brain recover from traumas. So, and what's really interesting too is I would suggest, if people can bear it, and maybe this isn't possible for some people, if you get out and move in nature, it has way more properties of health and well-being for your brain than being on the treadmill. The treadmill isn't really using your brain to full capacity because it's inside, and the brain evolved to be in nature. It's meant to be noticing birds and using the balance system to avoid rocks and roots in the path that you're running on. It's meant to notice changes in the air and wind and humidity and see other people. So the more you can get out in nature and the more you can move in nature, it's incredible how much it can help your brain. And I just want to circle back to that co-regulation piece. What you've described for us and what you are so lucky to have, Vicki, is you called your husband your rock. Really what your husband did and your therapist did was the neuroscientists would use the word co-regulation. That's the most sophisticated evolutionary part of the brain, where co-regulation is when your child comes in crying and you gather them up in your arms and you help their system calm down. It's when your husband listens to every word you say and doesn't criticize you or say you're crazy or just forget it, just let it go. He just lets you speak your trauma. And of course, your therapist is a professional, and they're there to help guide you through this process of recovery from trauma. But all of those, that's all co-regulation. You can get it from someone holding your hand. You can get it from someone just being present with you with their own nervous system, their brain and body, just by proximity, is helping you calm down and stay centered so that you can return to yourself.
Well, and what I find so interesting about like the discussion on that co-regulation piece is, especially for men, where we're like the quote unquote like problem solver people, as we just like age, we get told don't be emotional, like just try to fix things. So we basically learn out of our emotional beings and learn to, like, if somebody is having an emotional issue and they're telling you about it, we start to jump to, okay, how do I fix this? How do I correct this issue for this person, versus just being there to listen and recognize their feelings and support them in that moment, which is like sometimes when we have like those discussions in like heterosexual relationships where it's like, I wish my partner would just listen to me instead of him trying to always help me, because we've learned out of that, when that co-regulation piece is just having someone there to listen and say like, yeah, that sucks, I'm sorry. that validation and that listening is sometimes all somebody needs. They don't need the issue fixed in that moment.
It's so true. That listening, my husband didn't tell me, he never said anything. He never said, get over it. A matter of fact, I wasn't angry. I didn't understand some of it, but he was angry. He was, he was like but he just, like I said, listened, and it was helpful. And this is a good point to make too, because doctors and therapists out there do not know about workplace bullying and mobbing. And I found that out the hard way. When I went to go out on FMLA, my doctor said to me, just put your nose down to the ground and keep going. I'm like, what? My reaction was so hysterical that she wrote me a note out of work, but I mean, that's not what I needed to hear. And then my therapist, I had worked with him before when I went through a divorce, 10 years before. So I knew him. There was a level of comfort. And I, saw him over the course of the next year, maybe even two. But it was almost 2 years out before we started talking about PTSD, because when he and I spoke, we never spoke about the time elapse, so he thought maybe this could have happened in a 3-month span at work, when I was really talking about a 15-month span, and so PTSD usually there's that 6-month window. And he was really good when 20 months out, I said to him, do you think I have PTSD? And I mean, this is great, and he said, no, because, you need 6 months. And I'm like, this happened and I actually sent him my medical records. And then he said to me, oh my word, and he got some books on mobbing and started reading it, so because he had no idea what was going on. But again, he was a really good listener. So, to Jennifer's point, that was, really helpful that he at least heard me out, and I felt safe there.
I want to go back in this context to what Amanda said, because if you think of it this way, like if you think of anxiety this way, for example, this could be, we can call it all the different things we want to call it. So we can call it post-traumatic stress disorder, we can call it anxiety, but what's happening from a brain point of view that's really interesting and that helps us work with it more is, imagine that we're walking down the path and Vicki has been traumatized. Her boss at work, this woman that was the director while she was AD, this woman tormented her with snakes. That's really what she did, to constantly make Vicki unsure of herself, unsure what she was doing, trying to figure out why she's so isolated. She used snakes as the way to do it. Okay, so Vicki and I are walking down the path and we see a snake on the path. Vicki's system goes instantly into sympathetic fight or flight. She's going to either fight that creature to the death because she knows she's going to die, or she's going to run away as fast as she can. Her body floods and her brain floods with cortisol and adrenaline. I, on the other hand, have not been tortured by snakes. I look at it and I'm like, what do I do? I'm kind of curious. What is this creature? And I don't have that reaction. One more step along, we see, both of us at the same time, that it's a stick that's curved. It wasn't a snake at all. The person that has anxiety cannot correct. So Vicki has developed PTSD. She's got anxiety. Her hands go numb. Her brain cannot use its predictive mistake feature, the part that corrects prediction errors. She predicted it was a snake. She was incorrect. My brain adapts instantly. It goes, that's just a stick. I don't have anxiety, but she does because of her trauma. So you see, the person that has anxiety, really what's happening is the prediction mechanism is out of control. They're thinking 24/7 about all the bad things that could happen. They're anticipating them because of past trauma, and they're not able to correct anymore to adapt to reality. They see everything as a threat. And this is where they get so debilitated. But once you understand the brain mechanism, you can I get people in my book to start talking to their brain. So the idea being, you never let your brain take charge of anything. You tell your brain what's going on and you work with it, sort of not letting it have free reign because it makes lots of mistakes. So you tell the brain, don't worry, it's just a stick. Let's calm down. Let's take that cortisol and adrenaline right back down to zero. Let's do deep breathing. Let's close our eyes and do mindfulness. Let's co-regulate with our friend who's here with us that can support us. Let's talk about it. Let's get some physical exercise to run off all that excess energy. We can do lots of things. They're very active. They're not passive. And they're telling the brain, you know what, you're the engine, but the mind is the one that drives the car at all times. And I will tell you, brain, whether it's a snake or a stick.
I'm going to say I was deathly afraid of my abusers, needless to say, having had my whole, my physical being and then my financial being, ruined and that kind of thing. It took me a long time. But one of the things that I did, and I have been trying to promote that ever since, is, even when I was 4 months out of the workplace, I started helping get endorsements for another piece of legislation on this. And I did it very secretly. I did it at my computer in my pajamas, and I wouldn't put my name to it. I was really afraid. And, it all started, but last year was 2022, Deb and I, we founded Deb Felzoy, who is our fearless leader here in Massachusetts, in case you don't know who she is. She and I co-founded End Workplace Abuse and then co-authored that piece of legislation, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. And it was just a healing journey for me. And the more I did, and the more I talked, and I started running support groups for people. Deb had support groups on her Dignity Together business, and I was a monthly, I did it once a month and everything else, but it kept my hand in it. So I was seeing people come in fresh like I was, because as I'm moving away from my trauma and getting better, I could remember, and it helped me remember, what to say and what to do. And it's the best thing that I ever did for myself was to just keep advocating. And as you can see, now I've gotten to the point where I went from being completely silent to finger pointing right at my employer without, they haven't come at me yet, but we'll see what happens, But you know what? I'm not afraid of them anymore. You know what? And honestly, they took everything I have. I have nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose. Maybe they should have pulled my tongue out when they took everything else, but that's where I'm at. So
I would just build on what Vicki was saying, in that the earlier you can identify that it's happening to you, like really trust. So the neuroscientists call it neuroception. So we have perception. Perception is very conscious, but we also have neuroception, which is very intuitive. It's brain and body together assessing the safety of the situation. And if you listen to your neuroception, which is unconscious, so you have to really be like, listen to your intuition, listen to your gut, listen to what your heart's telling you. When you start to notice there's things that are wrong, I would highly recommend put down the date and the time and 2 lines or 800 paragraphs about what happened. Keep a record so that as your brain is getting more and more panicked, more and more numb, more and more derailed, more and more all systems are degrading because it can't answer the question, you've got a document that you can go to and that you can show other people. As soon as you do that, you start advocacy at a very early state. You don't wait until the trauma has been done, which is what happens to most of us, Vicki. I certainly speak from experience. And then have to start that hard path of regaining your sense of selfhood and your confidence and your bravery and your right to speak, your truth, and all these things. You start doing it at the beginning. So I would just say out there to every single person, especially somebody who's in a domestic situation or a romance situation, dating situation, where they have a bad feeling, but they keep overriding it with all the cultural things that have been hammered into us about romance and jealousy actually means that they are obsessed with you, and you're so special, and all of these myths that we need to debunk. Really, when you feel like something was said or done that wasn't okay with you and it upset you, keep a diary of it. Just keep clear. with your neuroception, assessing the danger of the situation, which will get worse and worse and worse if in fact you're dealing with an abusive person. As we all know, it escalates. It starts with the honeymoon, and then it gets more and more and more dangerous as time unfolds, and it erodes more of your power. So you are in charge of your own power. Do not hand it over to anybody else. And one of the best ways you can do that is by keeping track. I would also say, becoming knowledgeable about how your brain works is really inspiring and really empowering. You start to understand why you feel the way you do. And it isn't feelings, and you aren't mentally ill, and you aren't traumatized even. Really, your brain is working double time for you to survive. And if you're not working with your brain, it can make lots of mistakes.
Well, thank you both for joining us today and giving your wonderful wisdom to our audience. But before we sign out here, is there anything either one of you would like to make sure our audience understands before we wrap this up here?
I guess I'll jump in again and just with, I looked on your website and I saw, it said bringing up domestic violence and sexual assault in conversation usually leads to awkward silence. And, it's the same for not so much the workplace bullying, because people will know that there's, people in the workplace. But as far as the institutional complicity, it is just people do not want to hear it. That was another painful piece of this journey for me, is that people would look at me and their eyes would glaze over, because it was easier for them to believe that I did something wrong to warrant the expulsion from the workplace than it was to believe that my employer and their representative employees abused me. So it's really, so we have that same struggle that you have had with your other conversations. And the one thing that we have been fighting, and again, things have changed even since I've been out of work in the last 5.5 years, is raising public awareness. So, and it's not just the bullying piece, but that the mobbing piece, the institutional complicity, they're so deeply entwined. And so there's a lot of confusion around that. So I can't thank you enough, for this opportunity today to come out in this forum and to be able to, put some of this, out there so that people can understand, so that they do understand when something is happening, or they might know someone. I get people all the time, text me and say, Vic, can you talk to this person? They're having trouble at work. And that's what, that's what's horrible, is that employees are in the workplace today and are still being abused. And they don't know it. I had no idea, and they still don't. So raising public awareness is huge. So thank you.
I would just, I have two final comments I'd love to make. And one of them, again, builds on like Vicki's knowledge and lived experience of this, and then the work she does with other people. One of the things that the brain really struggles to understand is a two-sided presentation. So my next book that I'm writing is called The Gaslit Brain. And I'm looking at how people fall for gaslighting. Why do they believe something that's obviously untrue is the premise of the book. Why do they believe? And that's the word that Vicki used. They would rather believe that these people are doing the right thing and that they're dealing with a crazy lady or same thing with the domestic. If you think of a domestic abuse victim, oftentimes the perpetrator presents as two different people. When they close the door to the home, the violence and the anger and the insecurity and the control, it erupts. Outside of the home, they work really hard to maintain the facade. I call it, it's an old literary term from a famous book, but if people don't know it, it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So in the workplace, Vicki, all of her people, they present as respected Dr. Jekyll. Dr. Jekyll believes in care and health and well-being and protection and respect. And behind closed doors, he becomes Mr. Hyde, who's a murderous, destructive, I'll take your financial life. I will destroy your confidence. I don't care how long you've worked and served our company. You are absolutely nothing to me. I will crush you. That's Mr. Hyde. And the brain goes, wait a second, I'm a sequential processor. You're trying to tell me this person is two things at once? I don't get that. And it just goes, right? It can't understand Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That's one of our brain's real problems. So we need to work really hard with our mind to help our brain understand that sometimes people present in two different ways. We need to learn language and communication strategies to tell people that story. Use the correct vocabulary to say, this, they might show you this side, but I can assure you that when, they start to email or they pick up their phone or they make, corporate decisions or in the home, this is what's happening. So that's one thing I would say is watch out for the double presentation. If you can start to see that for what it is, you can keep your brain a lot more calm and rational and problem solving and so on. The other thing I would just finally end on is hurt brains hurt. When your brain has gotten hurt, you hurt yourself, or when your brain has gotten hurt, you hurt other people. And if we can keep thinking about that as a medical crisis in our society and rehabilitate people and get them the help they need, we would all be safer and happier and healthier. Like going back to what Sean said, when we stop teaching our boys that they shouldn't have rich, complex, emotional lives and feel vulnerability and love and show it, we're going to have a very different society. When instead we try and turn them into, you have to fix everything. You have to be a problem solver. It's just, we're long overdue for a change. And I'm really hopeful, especially with the work you guys are doing, this platform you create, we can make some very positive change. So I know Vicki and I both feel the same, and thanking you so much for having us today.
Well, thank you both for joining us. I've really enjoyed having you both here. Vicki, I also make sure I point out, thank you for sharing your story with us. We know it's never super easy for people to do, so we always appreciate it when people are willing to come on to our podcast and share their story with our audience. And before we sign out here then, did you have something, Amanda, or were you just... Okay.
Can I just say one more thing too?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to mention, that again, that Deb and I co-founded End Workplace Abuse. So if someone's looking for, someone is listening to this podcast and they are looking for a place, to just kind of, we're growing a collective movement of advocates. So that would be, they could just go to End Workplace Abuse. And then we also have the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. So that would be WPSAct.org. And they're both websites are kind of tied together, but just, people are out there listening, or they know someone who's going through this kind of abuse, that would be the place to go.
Awesome. I will make sure I have links to those in our show notes. And you read my mind, because my next question for both of you were, do you have any socials or anything that you wanted to push out to our audience?
Well, Vicki jumped the gun on that. I, of course, would love for people to read The Bullied Brain, Heal Your Scars and Restore Your Health. It's available everywhere. If you get it off Amazon, I would love a review, because that's how the algorithm gets tripped to show people the book. And honestly, the science it's so empowering. It's world changing. The science is amazing. So my website is Bullied Brain. There's a contact form there for me. I do lots of speaking engagements and workshops for sports organizations and corporates and schools. And I work really hard to change. I go inside as a consultant, and I change cultures. Like I could go into Vicki's workplace and say to them, you know what, this is not sustainable. This is not good business. Let's change how you guys operate. Let's make this I call it a new neuro paradigm, a brain-informed framework, a neuro paradigm, not the bullying and abuse paradigm that just doesn't serve any of us. It's really destructive.
Awesome.
I'd just like to make another point. I'll keep going, but just quick, because Jennifer and I testified recently at the Massachusetts public hearing, and the chairwoman of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development here asked Jennifer to provide a definition of bullying. So here we have the most powerful person who doesn't really understand what we're talking about, but what she did here was neuroscience. This is a very intelligent, a chairwoman is very intelligent, and Jen, what she said kind of piqued her interest, and I did not hear her ask anyone else for any other information while a lot of us gave testimony. So there you go.
Well, thank you both again for joining us, and thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and other content going out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.